Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about the surprisingly strong spring housing market and the ongoing chances of a recession. First, I want to thank our sponsor, Rocket Clothes, for making this episode possible. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
It is wonderful to be here, Sarah.
I am so excited about this episode because we're looking, now that we are in the second week of May, let's take a look back at the spring housing market. How do you grade this spring housing market?
So generally, just for how I look at housing, this kind of gets an A, only in the sense that, of course, sales aren't booming or anything in that nature. But what I wanted to see in the 2025 year was similar to what I saw in 2024 in terms of, and we're gonna list them off. Number one, inventory growing at a healthy pace. That's a positive, right? Price growth is cooling down. That's a positive. Number three, we see more concessions being done. You know, when you have an affordability crisis, whenever you get more inventory, more choices, you get we're not getting mortgage rates back to 3%. So the affordability has to work through wages, household formation, price growth slowing down. And in that context, I never liked the housing market in 2020, 2021, and early 2022 because inventory is too low. So the inventory side is a total A plus. Again, new listings data. It's not quite back to normal, but we're gonna get the 80,000 plus by the time this podcast comes out. The tracker will be out here. So that is a positive. Number two is basically the 10-year yield falling at the start of the year has facilitated 14 weeks of positive year-over-year growth data. It's nothing spectacular. We're working off a very low base, but you can see that the demand curve is there. You can see that we're not breaking under 4 million, which is a key level for me, and that just mortgage rates going a little bit lower this year has created positive demand on that set. So because I've wanted to see more choices, price growth cooling down, and a minimal response to just the 10-year yield going down just a little bit. We never got down to the 6 to 6.64% level yet, where we've seen much better data. It's as good as you could hope for, considering everything that's going on, not just here in America, but around the world.
I love that. I do think it's sort of like surprisingly positive. We've talked about this before that, you know, when you look at it and you're like, actually, housing's been pretty positive the last 4 months. It's like, that's pretty surprising to everyone because it's like there's a lot of things going on and the consumer is being hit by a lot of different things.
You know, no one's talking about purchase application data being up 14 weeks in a row. Not one person. Inventory being up positive in that sense. We have a few 8 to 9 states are back to 2019 inventory levels. When the entire country is back to 2019 inventory levels, you'll never hear me say low inventory ever again. That just goes back to my work in the last decade. I think, again, the disagreement I have with people is that people said, well, consumer confidence is down. Housing confidence is down. There's trade war tariffs. The stock market was down. It was in a bear market recently. All these variables, will not allow people to apply for a mortgage to buy a house. And that did not happen with elevated rates. And again, for me, as always, the 10-year yield rules everything. So even the 10-year yield just going down from 481 to 4%, and really rates just from 7.25 to 660. That created a little bit of demand, which I would not have taken that bet if somebody told me that, Logan, you would have 14 straight weeks of positive year-over-year growth data running into May. Where do you think rates are? I said rates have to be between 5.75 and 6.64. I would have never said that. So it's a healing process. And that's not the most sexiest thing in the world to talk about because it's just, you want price growth to slow down. You want more choice. You want things to create a better atmosphere because when rates do fall towards 6%, you have a better backdrop for all buyers and sellers in that regard. And that was the whole concept of team higher rates in February of 2021. Like it was we were in a really bad spot and nobody knew it, and so many people didn't believe in the COVID recovery, and so many people thought we were going to have a forbearance crash or all these things, but it was really an unhealthy backdrop. Now we're getting something back to normal. And again, a lot of this reminds me of the 1980s. So, and in the 1980s, a lot of people said there's two recessions. Inventory was almost twice as much back then as we are here, and unemployment rates were still high and all that stuff, and mortgage rates went down just 2.5%. Sales started to grow. It eventually went down 5% from 18 to 13%, and sales almost looked vertically up. So we're getting there, right? We're getting there. That was part of the presentation we did in Florida, to kind of show people the history of housing cycles and how they operate. But it wouldn't work if inventory didn't grow, or new listings data didn't grow, and we didn't get any positive response from the 10-year yield dropping in the early part of the year.
So you mentioned two recessions in the 1980s. The word recession right now, it's so interesting, right? You always say we don't say the R word until certain things happen. We've talked on this podcast about what that is for you as far as what happens with jobless claims. Is there any sense when you look at things that like could we even avoid a recession, and what would that do to housing?
Regarding a recession, so many people were 100% in, like, because they saw the Godzilla tariffs and they said, no way, there's no way we can't avoid a recession. So we'll have to look at it as that we're starting the process of doing deals. Can we get them done fast enough to prevent all these shocks happening at once? Again, we still have 162 million people employed. Household balance sheets in terms of homeowners are still in a good spot. I think going out for the next few months, it's, this Monday morning, we don't know. Maybe we did a deal with China. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we did. We're going to sign deals with India, Japan, whatever it is. It's going to be a day by day process, because the faster we get into this deal work, the better it would be for the long term. So it's a timing thing. If there were no Godzilla tariffs or any tariffs, we'd be sitting here debating if rates are low enough to prevent the builders from laying off people. But clearly, the first 4 months of the year, we were expanding. Some people could say, well, there's a lot of people buying ahead of tariffs and it messes up the data. I believe that's a valid theory. But for now, try to hold this together, and not prevent a recession, which is interesting because so many people at the start of the year says, we're trying to create a recession because we can't refinance our debt. We need to get rates lower. That was such a cockamamie lying theory, that spread around the internet. That's not, if the bond market couldn't handle any of the short-term or long-term supply coming in, 10-year yield and short-term rates would be so much higher, but we can handle that stuff. I think that was just a kind of a teamwork huddle. Hey, tell everybody we want to create a recession because we need to refinance the debt. Not the case. We were able to handle that at some point. So I'm hoping that deals could be made faster, quicker. And one good thing about the market acting better is the spreads are acting better, right? On days when the 10-year yield has gone up, even noticeably, the spreads have compressed and it limits the damage. That's what we saw earlier in the year. So hopefully that continues. But again, it's a wild card. Every weekend, every day, we don't know what's going to happen, what's going to be said. So we have to take it one day at a time. But hopefully we can get through this stage without so much damage from the trade war tap dance.
Okay, well, I have to note your use of the word cockamamie, which is, an A+ word and one that I feel like is an old word. So I love
It's an
when you
old
use
school
it.
world. I got probably millennials and Gen Z are like, what did he just say? What was that? So I don't think I've used that word since the 6th grade. So
I was like, pull it out of nowhere. I don't know. That's great. It does really explain a lot. It's a good word for this time frame. The volatility is what we keep talking about. So I think it's interesting that you're talking about the spreads, because we know that the spreads have been reacting to so much of all the other headlines going on. And that's not something any of us can control. It's not something the housing market can control, but they are directly impacted by it.
It's a healthy thing, because I don't think no not a lot of people know what mortgage spreads are. And it's just, because we really didn't have to deal with it much in the last decade, and now it's been a prolonged issue. And I think it's healthy that people are, especially in the real estate and mortgage industry, understand what that is. Because if the spreads are normal, we're under 6% today. But there are times going back to the 1970s where we have elevated spreads. I know in the early 1980s it was 5 to 6%. We wouldn't have got to 18% mortgage rates if the spreads weren't that bad. Or even recently, we wouldn't have got to 8% mortgage rates if the spreads didn't blow up in 2023. So the spreads improving is a positive. We lost it a little bit to market volatility, but hopefully we get it back to a lower end. And again, then it goes into what's the Fed going to do, how we're going to react to trade wars, so all this stuff. But take that all aside, housing, okay. Not great. The builders are still dealing with supply and margin pressure issues. But if you would have taken every single person and said, hey, listen, you have trade wars, recession talk, mortgage rates near 7%, nobody would have said positive 14% for positive 14 weeks of year-over-year growth, healthy inventory growth, price growth cooling down. All these things to me are positive, which late 2020, all of 2021 and early 2022 weren't the case in terms of the ability for prices to escalate out of control.
Surprisingly resilient is what we could say. And, that's positive. That's what we can hope for.
In the last decade, total home sales, the peak was about near 6 million toward the end of the decade. And we're roughly near 5 million. So again, to me, we're missing 1 million mortgage buyers. And rates are elevated, prices are elevated, taxes, insurance, everything. To get near 5 million home sales just shows you that, the easy answer is, well, if mortgage rates go sub 6%, we can grow sales and people will feel better. I wish I had, an easy way of saying, yeah, that can happen, but I can't. I haven't been able to forecast under 5.75% rates in a while. For all the reasons, the spreads, the Fed policy, everything. So, but considering this year, all the things that the country has had to deal with, and all the crazy headlines, and people saying nobody's going to buy a house and everything, and just to see that kind of resilience and inventory growing and price cuts percentage growing enough to where price growth is cooling out, these things are all positives.
We will take it. We will take it where it comes. And I know we're just going to be looking at the data every day. So, Logan, thank you so much for being on. I would encourage everyone to look at the tracker. That's where you break down 9 or 10 different data points every week. And that's the most up to date.
And speaking of which, a lot of people ask about the tracker. So when we brought this up in Florida, I said, listen, what we want to do is give you the active inventory, give you the new listings data, give you the price cut percentages, and 1/3 of all homes in America have price cuts. Not a lot of people know that. That's very normal. Then we always want to analyze the 10-year yield, and then what's going on with the mortgage spread. So a lot of people ask, where can we find the mortgage spreads? The tracker updates it every weekend for everyone. So you can sit there and take a look at it, and you'll be fine with that. And we try to verse people on, what our forecast was and what's happening year round. So we hold everyone's hands 24/7. And we move it forward. But then we also add the purchase application data. We count it a little bit differently than others. And then we have our total pending contracts. I show kind of the monthly version of it. And Mike Simon said he does the weekly version on his podcast. And this way you get the total picture, right? This way, think about it. Everyone is going to be so versed with the freshest data that you don't have to wait 2 months to look at old, stale data. You're always on current and forward. And this way, nobody gets surprised.
Nobody gets surprised. So go to HousingWire.com, look up Housing Market Tracker. Everything's there for the last, actually, 2.5 years now we've been doing this.
Yeah.
You've been doing this? Yeah. That's a lot. Great data. And Logan, thank you again so much. We'll talk soon.
Pleasure.